Hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Oil and Gas on the Edge, How Always-On Edge Computing Solutions Are Accelerating Digital Transformation. We all know downtime is the enemy of oil and gas operations, and reliability is key to any plan and for continued growth. So today, we've brought experts from all angles of this vertical to discuss the role of edge computing in the ongoing digital transformation of the industry. So to introduce our panel, from edge computing expert Stratus, we have Greg Hookings, who is the head of business development for digitalization. From industrial software giant AVEVA, we have Amit, the director of global pursuits, who's joining us today. And to address this topic from the operator side, we have Saudi Aramco's head of digital strategy and growth, Khalid. So thank you everyone for joining me today in this discussion. Clearly, I'm very eager to get started. So let's jump into the questions. So Khalid, I'm actually going to start the conversation with you on kind of a broader level. When we talk about digital growth, what are the key technologies that come to mind?
Thank you, Carla, and it's a pleasure to be with you in this panel with the rest of my colleagues. If you allow me, before we cover the technology side, I would like to emphasize on the importance of organizations having a clear vision of their digital strategy and digital ambition. And at Aramco, we have a bold vision to be a leading digitalized energy corporation. And we embarked on this digital transformation journey a few years back with an aim of capitalizing with digital technologies breakthroughs to deliver tomorrow's energy more sustainably, efficiently, as well as safely. And this vision is supported by key strategic pillars, one of which is to improve the financial performance and maximize shareholder value by enhancing reliability and operational efficiency. That is why it's crucial to adopt and build the right technology around the business processes. And having said this, we have established specific digital technology tracks as part of our digital transformation program to deploy technologies ranging from artificial intelligence and machine learning, blockchain, 3D printing, robotics and unmanned aerial vehicles or drones, virtual and augmented reality, digital twin, and even space technologies. We pursue the deployment on exploring opportunities across these different digital tracks. We consider growth in three specific dimensions. First, technologies that will transform our core as well as support functions. Second, technologies that will expand our digital ecosystem. And third, disruptive digital technologies that are pushing innovation boundaries. Let me share just one example, the deployment technologies that we had in Aramco. We have deployed a greenhouse gas emission analytical solution that monitors emissions from more than 2,000 sources across 170 operating facilities. And this analytical solution has helped us to benchmark performance of each and every facility and enabled us to identify additional emission reduction opportunities.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And a lot of the technologies that you've mentioned, we're seeing growing conversations around them. And I think I'd like to bring Greg into this from the edge computing side. So when we're talking about bringing all of these technologies into oil and gas operations, which can be vast and remote, what role does edge computing play in enabling that digital deployment and that digitalization?
Sure, it's a good question, Carla. And hello, Khalid, and hello, Amit. It's a pleasure to be on the panel with you today. Yeah, so what's the role of edge computing in digitalization, I think is the question. And, when we look at that, I think it's very important to recognize what we're trying to do is bringing two worlds together. You have the operational technology world, and then you've got the information technology world together. So you're bringing these worlds together, and it's very important to do that. When you think about digitalization, you've got, thousands of devices out there in the field that are collecting and bringing data in, and it's about managing that data on premise. And the reason why we're thinking about that with edge computing are for, the benefits of, reducing latency, being able to manage data on site, being able to make decisions, being able to present, things that need to happen in real time, actually on premise there. We're also thinking about things like security. When you're talking about digitalization, you suddenly start to expose yourself to areas of threats. So thinking about how to protect those assets once they're out there in the field is very important. And then, amongst the other benefits, there's thinking about scalability. When you look at traditional IT deployments, you take a brand new, you need to increase bandwidth within those IT deployments. You have to rebuild them from ground up typically. But with edge computing, it's distributed in essence. So you can add nodes and you can add on to the infrastructure, which is common in oil and gas. It's not just one vision. The idea is changing, as Khalid mentioned in his first idea, that the vision that might be here today will be changing over years to come, and you need architecture that can scale with that.
Amit, anything to add from your side?
Yeah, of course. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to the panel. Very nice to be speaking with you, Carla, and Greg and Khalid. So I'm also very happy to see the composition of this panel, right, where we've got Greg from Stratus and Khalid from Aramco and myself from AVEVA, because we bring complementary but diverse perspectives to the issue. And in my case, the way I look at it is that edge computing has been around for a while. What's really different about the point that we're on the digitalization continuum at the moment? So one of the things is some of the great work that Stratus is doing in terms of improving reliability, availability, robustness, and capacity of what can be done at the edge. That's one thing. Where we in AVEVA perhaps bring something else new to it is how we are now bringing that together with the overall enterprise challenge. So, some of the research that we refer to recently by the World Economic Forum, industrial operators annually lose up to, or actually in excess of $500 billion worth of profit because of poor or isolated or suboptimal decision making. And that's partly a function of the splintered or siloed way that these things have had to be done in incredibly complex organizations, such as Aramco. So I was very happy to hear Khalid's description of the digitalization strategy that Aramco are putting in place, where they're seeking to target operational efficiency, profitability, reliability, and also greenhouse carbon emissions. But in order to do that, you really need to have an enterprise view. And from the AVEVA side, we bring this approach called Edge to Enterprise, where what we're doing is trying to connect up the capability, the growing capability that's happening at the edge, leveraging the current trends in digital, in cloud, in communications, in telecoms, to kind of bring that all together at a level of awareness that can now empower that higher level of decision making, right? And I that I like is think about how the human body operates, right? Think about how aware we are of everything that we're doing, right? Your brain is processing every second billions of data points, essentially, right? You can be walking across a field barefoot and be not conscious of all the different inputs that you're absorbing. But the second your foot touches a thorn, your body leaps into action and it takes a localized decision, right? Based on parameters or expectations that are already set. So even before that signal gets to your brain, which in this analogy is the headquarters or the control room, a local action has been taken. But then that awareness gets to that point within microseconds. That's the kind of operational efficiency that we want to try to drive our industrial assets towards. And I think that's what the combination of what Stratus does, what AVEVA does, and the kinds of digital strategy that companies like Aramco are putting together, that's where we're going.
Yeah, and then looking at it from the operator side, from in your perspective, Khalid, at the moment, does edge computing play a role in your digital growth strategy?
Well, thank you for the question. I think edge computing or analytic at the edge or AI at the edge is a key element of any digital transformation program. And at Aramco, we have long realized the power of being able to deploy machine learning and artificial intelligence inside the plant fence, close to the end equipment and devices. And by enabling AI and machine learning and analytics close to the operational asset, edge computing is able to address data latency, like what Greg mentioned, data quality, as well as bandwidth issues. And actually, it enables predictive and prescriptive analytics to address operational challenges without having the need to send a lot of data to your cloud or to your data center. And in fact, our edge analytics roadmap, which was developed as part of an initiative to maintain resilient digital infrastructure to ensure scalability, reliability, as well as performance of our asset. And we have found that data growth is exponential and expected to increase many folds over the next few years, while a large amount of that growth will be accommodated by edge computing.
Yeah, and I mean, I like your perspective on looking ahead, because the intake of data is only growing, and especially in oil and gas, where we have this vast array of assets and this maybe not unique but very strong connection between operational physical assets and the IT infrastructure. That's a very interesting point. And I think I'd like to take this back then to you, Greg. We've been talking about edge computing in kind of a general sense, but I'd like to understand, when we're talking about edge computing, what are the specific solutions that we're discussing that are being used today?
Yeah, no question, Carla. So I like to think of edge computing solutions really as two parts. So when we look at that, there's the first part, what we consider at the top, which I class as the software stack. The solutions composed of different elements there. And when you look at software, and I'm sure as Amit will share in the latter part of this question, it's incredible what you can do with software today. Whether you're doing monitoring, control, asset management, you're starting to think about artificial intelligence. It's kind of sometimes difficult to think where we'll be in another 20 years time, considering where we're at on the software side today. So there's a lot of magic you can do on the software side, but the second part of this solution is really the hardware. That software doesn't run on thin air. It always runs somewhere, even in the cloud. It's always some physical device where it's being hosted on. The point where specifically I'm interested, coming from Stratus and thinking about the edge computing solution there, and it's thinking about the IT environment where this technology was developed. When you move it to the operational environment, there's a lot of changes that need to happen there. You're often working in an industrial environment. It can be dirty, it can be grimy. From a temperature point of view, particularly out in the Middle East, where Aramco's operating, extreme temperature ranges. So the solution there that we've got to think about is something that can be ruggedized, that can be used by personnel. I'm sure we'll talk on the people part of this later in this discussion, but they may not be IT experts, so thinking about a solution that is easy to use and intuitive, that an operator with no IT background can go and manage these systems once they're out in the field is very important. Again, coming back to the software point, there's a lot of what is like is that why they get the software, that intelligence, that analytical detail of what's happening on their operations. This is what they're really interested in. But that software is only operating whilst the hardware is working. So hardware failures will occur on servers out there. It's about how to protect those software assets whilst they're out in the field. So I think, as I said at the start, I think about it in two parts. There's the software part, the magic and the return on investment that you're getting from data, which is certainly something that AVEVA specialise in. But it's the other part of this is how to keep that software running continuously out in the field.
Yeah, and then I'll take question from it as the industrial system expert. If you could tell me a bit about the solutions that we're talking about, and maybe like the software that it's enabling.
So thank you for that. Yeah, first of all, fully agree with the comments that Greg made. At the end of the day, the hardware dependency is absolutely there. We need the same kind of approach to reliability and uptime and availability for the computing hardware for those platforms as we do for the assets themselves, right? The two things are increasingly and inextricably linked. So that's really important. From a software perspective, if I talk about it, how we look at it from the AVEVA side, in this edge to enterprise model that we are currently looking at, we sort of break up the whole ecosystem into three areas predominantly, right? So we have the asset location, which is site, where the equipment is turning, where it's operating, and then we have the control room where your activities around operations and a little bit of that day-to-day analysis happens, where operational decisions are executed, and then we have the enterprise level where you're looking more at sort of enterprise or fleet level monitoring, planning, optimization, and where development takes place, right? So if I now hone in on the kinds of applications, what are those applications that are doing at the asset location where the edge devices and the edge running applications are? Well, so in a broad sense, what they're doing is they are collecting data and exposing it to operators in the immediate instance. But they are now also increasingly being connected to one another, and they're being connected to a larger picture of what's happening at the enterprise level. So there is also visualization that's also increasingly happening. So we've got to remember that the kind of interface that we expect at an asset location is now also changing, right? So people want to be able to visualize in the way that they can in the operations room or in the HQ. It's no longer kind of the simple, hard to interpret graphics or interface of yesteryear. And then so in addition to all of that, we then bring all of that together. So we're talking about things like SCADA, we're talking about things like HMI. These are the kinds of applications that are running at the edge from the AVEVA perspective. Once we go to the next level, then we're talking about bringing the power of all of that data together and then going into the operational sort of optimization phase.
And so we've discussed some of the edge computing solutions. Khalid, you've already commented a little bit on some of the edge computing solutions that Aramco is already leveraging, but I would like to see if we could elaborate a little bit on that. So, what are the edge computing solutions that Aramco is leveraging right now, and have you seen an impact on your operations as a result?
Well, at Aramco, we have successfully deployed several edge computing use cases or solutions, and we are working with technology providers, IoT providers, and our partners in this space. We have also started looking at non-traditional and unstructured data sources such as videos and images. And one of the examples that we have deployed was an edge analytical platform to predict different flare characteristics, such as the flare height, the smokiness of the flare flame, as well as the angle of the flare. This solution considers historical video images as well as real-time images that is coming from specific cameras that we have in the field. And we have, in this solution, leveraged the deep learning neural network in our modeling techniques, which have been found to be highly successful with image analytics and machine vision. The platform ingests video data frame by frame, which was then analyzed by the models to estimate the flare height as well as the angle of the flare. And we have found it very successful in doing all of these analytics at the edge. And then we send to our corporate data center specific parameters instead of sending all the parameters and do the analysis at the centers.
And then, one of the things that we do talk about a lot in the oil and gas sector, we have the operators who are trying to apply these technologies, and you even mentioned, partnership and collaboration, and that's a very important part of the digital transformation process for oil and gas companies, coming from kind of legacy infrastructure and legacy, ways of doing business and moving towards this digital future. So I would like to take this back to Amit first, on, how do you support edge computing deployments, and tell me a little bit about that relationship and how AVEVA can help facilitate that process, because it's not necessarily an intuitive thing for an operator to take on by themselves.
No, that's a very good point. And of course, anytime you're talking about transformative application of technology, there's a little bit of a fear factor associated with that. There's a little bit of a concern about, are we doing something that's bleeding edge here? And also just the concerns that come from, well, are my colleagues going to be looking at something that I'm not looking at, right? So on a practical level, the improvement in communications, telecoms, cloud, whatever you want to call it, allows us to now manage edge deployments remotely, right? So kind of to the point that Greg made earlier around the intermeshing of the IT world and the OT world, well, we can't expect our OT people to be IT experts. And so we have to be able to support them remotely. And that's where the power of the cloud, the power of 5G, the power of pervasive Wi-Fi, et cetera, all of that kind of development, that's all happening. And from an AVEVA perspective, our edge toolkit allows kind of development, remote management of deployment, and remote support. So I think that's a big part of facilitating edge deployment from a practical perspective. Another element, of course, is to make sure that whatever is being deployed has visibility in other parts of the organization where it's expected or desired. And so again, in the current generations and the upgrades of our edge-related software, we're increasingly making use of technology that allows that visibility to be spread around the organization and across multiple platforms. So again, it's not just for the person who's standing at the panel. It's also for the person who's got an iPad, and it's also for the person sitting at a desktop. It's also for the person who is looking at a telephone. And that might seem like a small thing, and it's something that we're all quite accustomed to in our day-to-day working lives. But bringing that level of collaborative visibility really helps overcome a lot of the issues around how the current and next generation of edge technology is being deployed. So those are some of the things that we're doing that I think help.
Yeah, and Greg, I'd like to hear more from the, you're the edge computing expert. From your side, do you have anything to add in terms of deployment support?
No, yeah, I think Amit and Khalid have touched on a couple of interesting things already in the conversation now. I mean, collaboration is very important. So when we think about, an edge computing solution, it's not just a hardware element. There's that software element, as I spoke on previously. So, when we work with companies like AVEVA and partner with these companies, it's very much trying to understand, where are they going in the future in terms of, what is the new values they want to bring to their customers in terms of what they're doing. And then there's also thinking about what our vision is, and that comes, this was Khalid's first point. It's about vision, and there's an end user or an operator that sits behind that, and it's about kind of stream efforts into value into what the operations they're doing. Fundamentally, what drives Stratus and what we think about when we think about, how to support edge computing deployments is really three principles. One is simplicity. So thinking about how to keep things very simple. As I've mentioned, operators and the people working out in the industrial environment may not be IT specialists. So how to deploy that technology very easily, but more importantly is how to maintain that technology once it's out in the field. That's really where 95 to probably higher, 99% of its life cycle will be. So how do you maintain that equipment? How do you protect that equipment? So the second point is protection, thinking of how to protect that equipment. When hardware failures happen, how do you keep the software running? How do you keep that ROI happening from the software? How do you protect that from a security aspect? And then also, modern technology now needs to be autonomous. So how does it self-administer? How does it self-heal? How does it rectify? How do you put a service model in there to support the operators around that? And it comes back to that thing that Amit mentioned. Really, it's about collaboration there, in terms of how we're working and how we're facilitating and complementing that solution stack in terms of what we do.
Points just from the backdrop. I'm sorry, I'm hearing a little bit of echo. Okay, that's better. So yeah, no, you've raised some really interesting points. Specifically, it kind of brings me back to the backdrop that we're, the context that we're in right now, which is the pandemic, which is, a market, we face a really difficult market landscape right now. So, keeping operations on and digitalizing quickly has become a priority for many operators. And just because of that context right now, I'd like to touch on one of the key technologies that we've been hearing about even more than usual lately, which is predictive maintenance. And I know that's high on the agenda for many operators. It was widely talked about even before the pandemic, but now with the importance of remote working, keeping operations online, and with smaller crews on site, is this something that Aramco is leveraging, or something that you're planning to leverage?
Well, I believe this year has accelerated digital transformation for those who were ready and reinforced its importance to those who were behind. And at Aramco, we have been vigilant early on and established our digital transformation program several years ago, as I mentioned earlier. And one of the early use cases that we deployed was related to predictive maintenance, actually. And even before the pandemic, we deployed various predictive maintenance technologies to minimize potential disruption to our operations, enabling more efficient operation of critical assets. For example, we have deployed advanced analytics predictive solution for rotating equipment, and it has helped our engineers and operators at the field to detect and predict potential failures before they occur, and therefore proactively take the required corrective action. Two of our facilities, namely Khares Producing and Uthmania Gas Plant, received the prestigious World Economic Forum Global Lighthouse Award for being leaders in the adoption and the integration of cutting-edge technologies of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, including the predictive analytical solutions. So these solutions are helping us to optimize our maintenance activities, and in my view, the oil and gas industry will largely benefit from this advancement in predictive analytics.
Yeah, and then taking that back to the the provider side, the technology provider side. We've already talked about a few edge computing solutions and applications, but I'd like to better understand how they can actually benefit oil and gas companies, specifically right now when we really need to ramp up digital transformation. As Khalid, as you said, companies that were ready to do it, they're starting to accelerate their digital transformation even further. So Amit, if we could start with you, that would be great.
Yeah, great question. So first of all, I'd like just to acknowledge, I really like the examples that Khalid talked about around what they've been doing with asset predictive maintenance at the edge. And the way I look at it is that is actually, when I gave the example earlier about stepping on a thorn and how your body takes action, that's basically the perfect analogy, right? And if you take that to the next level, beyond predictive, and you go to prognostic, and then where an action can be executed based on prognosis and sort of set parameters and set points, then then it's becoming an absolutely perfect example, right? So what the impact that can have on downtime, unplanned downtime, in particular in oil and gas, is massive, right? I mean, and you know what it's like. Nobody knows better than Khalid, but just to give you an example, in my past days working for an owner operator, we had a mouse eat through a cable that tripped a logic controller and shut the plant down for a day, and that was $3 million down the tube, right? I mean, that's the kind of thing. Of course, we can make light of that a little bit, but then of course there's also the HSE aspect of all of that. There is a connection between our ability to be more reliable, be more available, to be more predictive and prognostic and reacting to asset-related issues that might be bubbling up, and also our HSE performance, which is absolutely important. And of course, HSE now not only about health and safety, it's also increasingly about environment. So, we know that oil and gas operators around the world are facing very aggressive and important low carbon targets. And these are all tools to help them along the way. Another important thing is the increasing push towards autonomous or remote operations. And that was actually a big feature in the World Economic Forum Lighthouse report that Khalid referred to earlier. And there are many reasons for that. One is that resources are increasingly being tapped in hard to reach places or harsh environments. Also, in some cases, we all have to consider the global crew change that's happening, especially in the oil and gas industry. There is another report that AVEVA refers to sometimes where we look at 50% of manufacturing jobs in the next 10 years possibly being unfilled due to the lack of skills and resources or competency. It's a similar problem that the oil and gas industry is actually facing at the moment, with a huge, or one or two generations of very experienced people taking into retirement their long experience and knowledge and expertise. So edge computing actually becomes a conduit. I kind of framed it earlier as being a way of collecting data and bringing it up to an enterprise level. But when you do that, you actually open up a conduit going the other way to bring remote expertise to the location where you need it. And I think that's also a very important part of the application in oil and gas.
Yeah, and I mean, I specifically like that, you brought HSE into this conversation, because it's not something that we've maybe touched on as much, but obviously it's hugely important. It's incredibly important for oil and gas operators, and increasingly so. Greg, I'd like to hear your thoughts as well on, some of the benefits of edge computing applications for oil and gas operators.
Before I give my answer, maybe I just hear from Amit. Did you find the mouse that caused the shutdown? That was the question from my side.
Good question. I actually have a picture of that mouse. If that device had been connected, we might have found it more quickly, right?
Yes.
Absolutely. Great story. Yeah, thanks, Carla. So I think when you look at the infrastructure that's out there right now that operators are managing, one of the things is it's not going to be, when you deploy edge computing, you're not going to rip out the existing infrastructure. So there's a lot of aging assets out there, and there's nothing wrong with those assets. For example, Amit was talking about PLCs in his last response there. There's nothing wrong with that technology that's there, but what we've got to do is bring in new technology that can work together with the sort of older assets that might be out there in the field. So thinking about edge computing is a great way about that. You don't need to, you can just kind of put that as an add-on onto a brownfield site and bring that in deployments. And I'm sure that's some of the things there that Khalid's been doing. Another thing, and I think both gentlemen have said that, it is around mission critical applications. It's very rare that it's okay for things to fail in the field. So keeping things running continuously. When you heard again from Khalid in the last response there about preventative maintenance. A lot of the intelligence of preventative maintenance is using historical data to make sense of the future. That is fundamentally what you're doing there. So being able to protect that data and keep the integrity of the data that you're using is really important for that prediction in terms of the future. And then I think the last thing I would mention is really, I said it earlier in the discussion, was around the people. The people that are working in the operational environments. Edge computing, the whole purpose of this technology is not to retrain and reskill people. We've got to think about the assets and knowledge that they have. So putting it in a format there typically is the right way to do it. That's simple for operators to understand, and you don't have to do this complete reskilling in terms of what they're doing. So there's several points there that I think bring out some of the benefits of edge computing.
Yeah, and I would like to take this back to you, Khalid, actually, before we move on to audience questions. If you have anything to add to that, they're coming from obviously the technology provider perspective, but from the end user, what benefits have you seen? Have you seen, the benefits that they're talking about, HSE and all of this? Have you seen that manifest in your own operations?
Yes, thank you. I think the benefits of the edge computing is something important to any digital transformation strategy. And as we talked earlier, one of the benefits is to accommodate some of the bandwidth to accelerate some of the deployment of solutions at the edge and bringing them closer to the devices. But I just want to touch base on some of the potential challenges that edge computing might face, similar to any other technology. And as we talked about in this panel, and at the concept level, edge computing is a change in the traditional computing architecture, moving from a centralized to a decentralized or to a distributed architecture, which creates a potential number of challenges, including managing these devices, especially in remote areas. And Amit has just talked about managing these devices. I think that is a potential challenge that the industry is going to face. And this challenge, if not managed properly, it might bring another challenge related to the scalability or deployment of these edge computing devices at scale. And a third challenge is related to skilling and talent. And as Greg mentioned, edge computing also involves upskilling of site personnel across diverse range of technologies, such as container, virtualizations, AI, and machine learning. And this can be a significant barrier to the adoption. And at Aramco, the edge computing roadmap that I just talked about earlier is addressing all of these challenges to make sure that we benefit from the deployment of edge computing in our facilities.
Yeah, if I may, Carla, could I just add on to that from Khalid? I think he brought up a very good point there, which was his second point around management of the devices. In theory, and we have cases of this, that you could end up with thousands of endpoints of edge computing as you scale and scale and scale. The management of these devices becomes really important, and I think it extends from a conversation Amit and I had prior to this. Was edge computing is not an isolated technology, so it's not a technology that sits there out in the field by itself. It's actually thinking about how to connect also gateways into the cloud, whether it's a private cloud, whether it's public cloud. It depends on the application. But we have to think about other technologies that help with the management here, and that is certainly the future. And what we're seeing today is about how to manage these devices, how to provide updates to the hardware, how to deploy the software. These are the directions that we're going in. But I think actually it would be wrong to not have this conversation and touch on the management part. It's a great point that Khalid brings up there.
Yeah. So this was actually one of the top questions from our audience, which I did want to get your perspectives on. So I'm glad that you've already picked on this. I think I'll just continue a conversation with Amit then, if you can address, what are some of the key challenges, that there are today in implementing edge computing in this sector.
So again, good question, and it's understandable that we would have touched on that in our discussion, and then it also comes in as a question from the audience because it's a top of mind issue, right? We talk about automation sprawl rather, right? So it's just this spread along the lines of what Greg was talking about. Like you could end up with thousands and thousands, and if you're an operation the size of Aramco, tens of thousands, if not more, of endpoints, right? That you're now having to manage, and that seems like a big challenge, and it is a big challenge. The question now is engaging the right kind of a platform to help you manage that. And you know, from the AVEVA side, part of our edge to enterprise approach is that we have these applications that run on the edge that are manageable and deployable and upgradable through the cloud, right? So that's one way of reducing the nature of that problem or the scale of that problem. It's still a very complex one, right? But that's just one way for us to kind of make it a bit easier and to get our customers to realize that we can get our arms around this issue. So let's not make that you know, an impediment, an obstacle, because we recognize the value. It's an important point because we have to remember that no change comes without pain, right? There's always some change, there's some adaptation that has to come. You have to break a few eggs to make an omelet, right? But the outcome of that is so worth it, right? And I think that's also part of what needs to be kept in mind here, is that when we talk about these use cases, when we talk about these business cases, I think the responsibility lies perhaps on companies like AVEVA and Stratus to make sure that our customers like Khalid at Aramco, you know, they realize the benefit, right? And of course, nothing sells a story like success in the past, right? So part of all of that is actually proving that the deployment can be done, proving that the value can be realized, and that this whole new growing layer of the stack of the architecture is manageable and maintainable and effective, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like you say, I mean, it's up to it. I think it goes back to this idea of partnership. You know, if you're going to take on this new challenge, partners have to be, you know, aware of the challenges, aware of the benefits, and working together to realize that vision. So that's a very good point. I think we have time for one question from the audience, and we have a question from Muhsin Allah, who's asking about Aramco's digital transformation strategy. So Khalid, this one's for you. Looking ahead to the coming year and beyond, do you see edge computing as an area with potential in terms of Aramco's digital transformation strategy? So the way I would phrase that is maybe is a priority looking to the near future.
Well, thanks to the question. I think, as I mentioned in the discussion, that edge computing is already part of our digital transformation strategy, and it's one of the components that we have developed a strategic roadmap for it to accelerate deployment of edge computing at our facility. We predict that operating facilities will be increasingly autonomous, and I think this is a point that Amit brought earlier. And a lot of sensors will be powered by AI and edge computing and edge analytics, and that is very important for us to consider in our strategy. In addition, edge analytics equipped with appropriate interfacing protocols underpins the industrial Internet of Things, which is a key element of any digital transformation program.
I think I would like to see if Greg and Amit, if you have anything to add in terms of edge computing, maybe in the near future, you know, how the outlook, how do you expect that to grow in oil and gas? If you have anything to add, maybe starting with Greg, if you have anything to add on that point. You're on mute.
There we go. We've got a bit of editing to do there, Carla. No, I think the outlook looks very positive. You know, particularly in oil and gas. You know, I think operators are globally trying to strive for increased efficiency. You know, this is anyone that's reading the newspaper right now, you know, knows that operators are looking to get more and more out of the assets they've got currently. And, you know, the way they're going to do that comes back to the points that we've touched on in this discussion. You know, understanding the data, you know, understanding what they're using the data, having a clear vision, as Khalid said, what do you want to use that data for? This is probably the first thing that we should talk about. and then putting that new infrastructure behind that. And so I think the outlook looks very positive, and the fact that edge computing, as I've mentioned, kind of retrofits into existing operational infrastructure is very important. So there's a lot of positives to take away from this, and it's an enabling technology for the future. So I think the outlook looks positive.
Amit, anything to add? Anything from your side?
Yeah, I think I echo the comments of my esteemed colleagues on this panel. It's the future is bright. I mean, I'm a very firm believer in innovation, and I think actually, the specific thing that we're talking about here, edge, is proven. What is happening now is that we're developing how we're using it. We are opening up new avenues. On the one hand, Khalid gave a great example of using a combination of video and analytics to determine the isopleth of a flare. That's a very interesting use case which personally I had never thought of. And as soon as he said it, I was like, this is brilliant, right? But then now we take all of that together, and like I said, from an AVEVA perspective, we want to bring the power of all of that data that's coming from the edge, that's potentially being analyzed and actioned at the edge, but bringing it up to that enterprise level, through our platform, which we call the Unified Operations Center. So it's to bring that visibility. I often refer to this quote by the management guru Peter Drucker, where he said that something along the lines of, after a certain point of complexity, it becomes impossible to manage a business. Using old tech, using our old siloed way of leveraging data, a lot of our businesses today are already too complex. I mean, look at the size of Aramco, for example. But exploiting the way we can collect and collaborate on the basis of data that's coming from the edge gives us a weapon, right? It gives us something that we can beat back that complexity with, right? So Greg talked about making things simple, but you need a tool to make things simple, and that's what the data that comes from the edge can actually do. And so, I think that when we look at the industrial targets as a whole, the need to be a bit cleverer about how we manage OPEX, the need to meet these environmental targets, to need to find some way to meet and counter for the potential shortfall in skills that's coming. All of these things are enabled through Edge as being a part of a wider platform of digitalization. So I'm very optimistic about the future and what Edge can do as part of that.
And of course, there is the added benefit that you could catch any mice, be in your plant, and stop it from turning down. So there's that. Well, unfortunately, that is all the time that we have. I think we could probably talk for a couple more hours without covering everything that there is to say about edge computing, about digital transformation. But my takeaway from this is it certainly seems like an exciting and an increasingly important time to be, engaging digital, and specifically, finding the right ways to deploy digital in oil and gas operations so you can get the maximum return. So once again, I just want to say thank you to everyone, all of our panelists, for being here today, for sharing your insight, and kind of rounding out the conversation from all perspectives. I really do appreciate you joining us. And of course, thank you to our audience for tuning into the discussion. You can find more on digital transformation and edge computing on our website, and this webinar will be available on our website and YouTube channel at a later time. So thank you everyone for tuning in, and thank you to our esteemed panelists for joining us today.